Winter rain was eating through the snow in eastern Kentucky when Colby Renshaw spotted something moving above the floodwater. A stranded German shepherd stood on the roof of an SUV, too exhausted to bark and too weak to trust the current beneath him. Colby pulled the dog to safety, gave him the temporary name Levy, and expected the story to end there. Instead, a respected disaster rescue group arrived with paperwork claiming the dog belonged to them, and Levy reacted to one familiar sound with unmistakable fear. What followed was not a simple fight over a dog, but a trail of records, promises, and people forced to decide what trust was really worth. And for a man who had stopped believing institutions kept their word, saving Levy would become the beginning of learning that some people still do. If an animal has ever given you a story worth remembering, share that touching moment with us. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Seal Dog Chronicles. For 6 days, winter had made the Cumberland Hills look cleaner than they had any right to. Snow rested on split-rail fences and abandoned tobacco barns. Ice glazed the bare branches above narrow roads. From the ridge behind Colby Renshaw's cabin, the eastern Kentucky valleys appeared quiet enough to belong on a postcard. Then the temperature rose 16 degrees before breakfast. By noon, rain was falling through the trees. By evening, the snow at lower elevations had begun to collapse into gray water. Colby understood pumps better than weather forecasts, but both operated by the same basic principle. Pressure always found the weakest place. At 54, he still had the broad shoulders and hard, economical movements of the Navy years, though nothing about the man kneeling beside a frozen wellhead looked ceremonial. His dark ash-brown hair, silvering heavily at the temples, was cut in a neat undercut. His face was clean-shaven, angular, and weathered around green-gray eyes that seemed to inspect things before trusting them. He wore an olive-drab combat shirt beneath a slate waterproof shell, charcoal work pants, and boots already coated in thawing mud. The old pipe wrench in his right hand mattered more to him than anything with an insignia ever had. He tightened the coupling, listened to the pump cycle, and waited. Steady hum. Clean pressure. Good enough. The elderly couple who owned the house watched through their kitchen window. Colby raised one hand to tell them the water was running again. He did not go inside for coffee. People tended to turn coffee into conversation. Conversation turned into questions. Questions sometimes reached places Colby preferred to leave closed. He loaded the wrench into the service truck and checked the county emergency radio, mounted beneath the dashboard. Flood warnings had moved from advisory to warning during the last hour. Warm rain was eating through the snowpack, and every creek draining the hills was carrying more water than the ground could absorb. Colby was not part of emergency management. He was not part of the volunteer fire department. He was not part of the Veterans Association in town either, despite 3 invitations and one man stubborn enough to keep sending Christmas cards. Organizations made promises in complete sentences and failed people in footnotes. Colby had learned that lesson 3 times from the VA. He did not need a 4th instructor. Still, he kept the county radio. After floods, people worried first about roofs, roads, and electricity. A few hours later, they discovered that a house without clean water could become unlivable just as quickly. That was where Colby came in. He turned down a low county road beside Laurel Fork, because 2 wells farther east had submerged control boxes. Rain tapped hard against the windshield. Meltwater raced brown along the ditches. Half a mile later, the pavement disappeared beneath moving water. Colby stopped, not slowed, stopped. The road dipped ahead through a narrow bottom where the creek usually ran 15 feet below the pavement. Now water crossed the roadway in a broad, fast sheet carrying branches, trash, and pieces of fence. He put the truck in park and got out. Cold rain struck his face. Colby walked only as far as the crown of the road remained visible. His eyes moved over the current, measuring speed, depth, debris, exit points. Then he saw the vehicle. A dark SUV had gone off the road 50 yards downstream. The current had rotated it sideways and jammed it between 2 large sycamores growing from the lower bank. Water struck the doors and curled around the hood. No movement inside. Colby reached for the radio. County dispatch. This is Renshaw Pump Service Truck on Laurel Fork Road. Vehicle off roadway downstream of the crossing. Possible flood involvement. Static cracked. A dispatcher answered, asked for the marker, then came back less than a minute later. Swift water crews were committed elsewhere. Estimated response unknown. Colby looked at the SUV again. Something moved on the roof. At first he thought it was a coat caught on the luggage rack. Then 2 ears lifted. German Shepherd. The dog stood with all 4 paws spread for balance, black and gold fur plastered flat by rain. Even from 50 yards away, Colby could see the animal trembling. He closed his eyes for half a second. "Of course," he muttered. The dog did not hear him. That was probably fortunate. Colby did not enter floodwater because something inside him wanted to be useful. Wanting was not a plan. He walked the bank instead. The SUV had stopped behind a stand of sycamores that broke the main force of the current. A narrow strip downstream carried slower water behind the trees. The ground above it was high enough for the truck. Possible, still dangerous. Colby backed the service truck onto firmer gravel, set the brake, and anchored the winch line around a thick maple well above the saturated edge. From the rack he pulled a compact John boat he used when pump houses flooded near ponds and low fields. Safety line first, secondary line second. No shortcuts. His old life had taught him many things he no longer missed, but it had permanently removed his ability to confuse speed with urgency. 10 minutes later he eased the little boat into the sheltered current. The German Shepherd watched him come. No barking, no frantic jumping. That worried Colby more. A healthy, frightened dog had energy for bad decisions. This one looked as though bad decisions had already been made for him. "Stay there," Colby called. The dog stared. "Excellent. We understand each other." The line tightened as the current caught the bow. Colby worked along the downstream side of the trees, keeping the boat inside the broken water. Every movement was deliberate. Rain ran from his sleeves. The SUV shifted once against the trunks with a metallic groan. The Shepherd flinched but did not move. When Colby reached the rear quarter panel, he secured the boat line through the roof rack. Only then did he climb high enough to see inside. Empty front seats. No passenger. No one trapped below the waterline that he could see. The dog lowered its body as Colby came closer. Easy. Its eyes were amber brown. Not wild, tired. Colby extended the back of one gloved hand. The Shepherd sniffed once. Then, with a hesitation so small it almost hurt to watch, the dog leaned its muzzle against Colby's wrist. Something inside Colby went quiet. Not healed, not softened, just quiet. He had expected resistance. Instead, he received trust from an animal that had no sensible reason left to offer it. "Bad judgment," Colby said softly. "You should work on that." The dog's legs nearly folded when Colby helped it toward the boat. That decided everything. This was not simply a dog exhausted from one night in a flood. Under the soaked coat, Colby could feel too much rib. The animal settled on the floor of the John boat and did not try to rise again. Colby released the roofline. The winch brought them back in slow increments. When his boots finally reached gravel, the dog lifted its head toward him, as though waiting to know what happened next. Colby knew that feeling better than he wanted to. By the time he returned to his cabin, the main road toward the temporary county shelter had closed under another wash of water. So the dog stayed, temporarily. Colby made that clear aloud, although the only witness was a German Shepherd lying on 3 folded shop blankets near the wood stove. "You're not moving in," the dog blinked. Colby brought water in small amounts, dried the coat, and checked paws, gums, ears, and joints as carefully as he could without pretending to be a veterinarian. Male, adult, maybe 4 years old. Long-legged for a shepherd with a broad black saddle over rich golden tan fur. The left ear stood, but its tip folded slightly outward. Beneath the chin was a small pale patch shaped almost like a half-moon. The dog drank, then paced, 3 steps to the door, turn, 4 steps toward the workbench, turn, back to the door. Colby recognized the behavior, not the cause, only the need to know where every exit was. He understood that part. Near midnight, the generator coughed when the power failed. Colby went into the workshop and started it manually. Then he switched on a rebuilt well pump, mounted to his testing rig, to make sure the freeze had not damaged the seals. The electric motor settled into a deep, repetitive hum. Behind him, the Shepherd stopped pacing. Colby looked back. The dog stood motionless. The motor hummed. Slowly, the Shepherd lowered himself beside the base of the workbench. One forepaw stretched forward, then the other. His head came down. For the first time since leaving the SUV roof, the trembling stopped. Colby remained beside the test pump longer than necessary. He understood machines because they told the truth in sound. Bearings complained. Belts slipped. Pressure dropped. A machine did not send a form 6 months later claiming the problem had never existed. The shepherd closed his eyes. Colby looked toward the dark windows, beyond which rain continued stripping snow from the hills. "You need something better than dog," he said. One ear moved. Colby considered the muddy creek, the flooded road, the trees that had prevented the SUV from being carried farther. Levy. The shepherd opened one amber eye. Temporary name. The eye closed again. Colby sat on an overturned bucket and listened to the pump run. He told himself he was staying awake because the dog needed watching. It was easier than asking why the workshop felt less empty. By morning, cold air had returned behind the front. Rain weakened into fine sleet, and pale sunlight began showing through torn clouds. County crews reopened one route into town. Colby put Levy in the passenger side of the truck rather than a crate. The dog resisted the vehicle at first, body lowering when Colby opened the door. Colby waited. No pulling, no command voice. After nearly a minute, Levy climbed in. The emergency animal station occupied the heated livestock pavilion at the county fairgrounds. Generators rumbled outside. Folding tables held intake forms, bottled water, donated blankets, pet food, and crates marked with strips of colored tape. A large banner near the entrance read, "Heartland Flood Pause Disaster Response Team." People in Navy rescue jackets moved efficiently through the building. Colby noticed the logo before he noticed the smiles. He had never trusted matching jackets. A technician scanned Levy's shoulder. The handheld reader beeped. "There we go." She entered the chip number. A record appeared. Then another box flashed across the screen. The technician's expression changed. A woman in her late 40s crossed from the adjoining operations table when called. She was lean, composed, with dark auburn hair tied low at the back of her neck, and hazel eyes that seemed accustomed to managing 6 problems simultaneously. A navy-insulated Heartland jacket covered a gray thermal shirt. A burnt orange field notebook was tucked beneath one arm. "Adrienne Hart," she said. "Field operations?" She looked at the screen before looking at Colby. "This dog was attached to one of our transport partners. We lost contact with a vehicle during the flooding last night." "You lost the vehicle or the dog?" Adrienne met his gaze. "The transport team reported the animal missing during relocation." She produced digital transfer records and a printed copy from a binder. Everything had dates, signatures, case numbers. Colby disliked how complete it looked. "So you're taking him. We're responsible for him." The word responsible landed better than property would have. Not enough better. Before Colby answered, another woman approached. Dr. Marjorie Kells was 58, compact and broad through the shoulders, with silver blonde hair cut to her jaw and rectangular glasses low on her nose. Dark teal scrubs showed beneath a gray fleece. A graphite stethoscope hung from one pocket. "I'm examining the dog before anybody takes anything anywhere," she said. No one argued. Kells ran practiced hands over Levy's ribs and abdomen, checked hydration, teeth, nails, paws. Her face grew less neutral. "How long did you say he was missing?" Adrienne answered. Kells looked again at the dog's condition. These nails didn't wear like this overnight. Neither did the body score. Colby said nothing. Outside, an engine started. Then a loudspeaker gave 3 short electronic tones. Beep, beep, beep. Levy changed instantly. His belly dropped toward the floor. His paws scrambled backward against the rubber mat. He drove himself beneath the corner of the examination table and pressed against the wall, eyes wide, body rigid. Colby crouched but did not reach for him. Adrienne stopped moving. Dr. Kells watched the dog. Not the loudspeaker. The dog. After several seconds, she stood. "Temporary veterinary hold," she said. Adrienne frowned. "Doctor, until I understand the physical condition and we confirm the transfer history." Kells looked at Colby. "That means you don't take him either." Colby felt an immediate, unreasonable anger. He had pulled Levy out of the flood. He had warmed him, stayed awake beside him, named him. None of those facts gave him ownership. He knew that. He still hated it. Kells completed the hold form. Colby looked down at Levy. For years, paperwork had meant doors closing. This time, a piece of paperwork had just kept one open. He did not know what to do with that. Across the pavilion, Adrian returned to the operations computer. She entered Levy's microchip number again, determined now to settle the question properly. One record appeared. Then she changed databases. Her fingers stopped over the keyboard. Same microchip, different case number. Adrian leaned closer to the screen. For the first time that morning, she no longer looked like someone defending an organization. She looked like someone who had found a question. Adrian Hart stared at the duplicate record for nearly a full minute before deciding it was probably ordinary. That was not denial. It was experience. Disaster databases were built by tired people, working 12-hour shifts in folding chairs, while generators coughed outside, and cell service failed every 20 minutes. Records duplicated. Names were misspelled. Microchip numbers were entered twice. Animals transferred between counties without the final field being updated. Heartland Flood Paws had handled thousands of animals across multiple states. One German Shepherd appearing under 2 case numbers was unusual. It was not yet sinister. Adrian printed both records. Colby watched from the other side of the temporary clinic as if the printer itself had just confessed to something. "You look disappointed," Adrian said. "I'm waiting." "For what?" "For somebody to explain why the mistake doesn't matter." Her mouth tightened. "That isn't what I said." "No. It's usually what comes next." Dr. Marjorie Kells looked up from a stainless table where she was arranging syringes and medication labels. "Wonderful," she said. "We have reached the philosophical portion of the morning." Neither answered. Kells removed her glasses, cleaned them with the edge of her gray fleece, then pointed toward the papers in Adrian's hand. "A microchip tells us which animal we're dealing with. It does not descend from heaven carrying a deed." Adrian crossed her arms. "We have a transfer agreement. You have a transfer agreement I have not finished verifying. And the rescue partner? Being contacted. The intake record? Requested. Veterinary history? Requested." Adrian exhaled. Kells put her glasses back on. "See how easy this is when nouns behave?" Colby almost smiled. Almost. Kells caught it anyway. "You," she said, pointing at him now, "do not get comfortable. The veterinary hold means he doesn't leave with you either." Colby looked toward the kennel row. Levy lay on a folded blanket behind a waist-high gate, head resting between his paws. At the sound of Colby's voice, one ear moved. "That was clear yesterday. I'm repeating it because you have the posture of a man planning to misunderstand me." Adrian gave Colby a sideways glance. "For once, we agree." Colby left before either woman could enjoy that too much. He told himself he had work. That part was true. 3 pump controllers had failed after floodwater reached low service boxes. A church basement had lost pressure. One elderly farmer outside Hazard Creek had a well that produced mud every time the motor cycled. For the next 7 hours, Colby dealt with problems that did not change their story. Burned relay, clogged intake, cracked pressure switch, replaced the bad part, and the system either worked or it did not. Machines could be stubborn. They were rarely evasive. At 5:30, Colby found himself turning toward the fairgrounds instead of home. He did not examine that decision too closely. The livestock pavilion smelled different after dark, less like a temporary command post, more like wet blankets, disinfectant, dog food, and tired electricity. Volunteers moved quietly between kennels. Someone had switched off half the overhead lights. Levy heard the truck before Colby entered. By the time Colby reached the temporary clinic, the shepherd was standing, not pacing, waiting. Colby stopped outside the gate. "You're developing bad habits." Levy's tail moved once, one slow sweep. That was worse. Dr. Kells was writing medication times on a clipboard. He ate. Good. Drank. Good. Complained about the thermometer. Excellent judgment. Kells looked at him. He also stood up when your truck came through the gate. Colby stared at Levy rather than answer. The shepherd stepped closer and placed one forepaw against the lower rail. Kells returned to the clipboard. "Don't make that mean more than it means." "I wasn't." "Of course not." The next evening, Colby came again, and the evening after that. By the 4th visit, he stopped pretending he had business nearby. He would finish his route, wash grease from his hands at the utility sink, then sit in a folding chair outside Levy's enclosure for 20 or 30 minutes. Sometimes he talked. mostly about pumps. Levy seemed to have no preference between submersible motors and jet systems, but he listened politely. Adrian saw the routine because she was still working out of the same pavilion. She also saw the part Colby did not. Every evening, after he left, Levy returned to the far end of the enclosure and lay facing the entrance. The dog did not cry. That made it more difficult to dismiss. One night, Adrian stood beside the gate after Colby drove away. Levy watched the empty doorway. "You know he thinks organizations are a contagious disease," she said. The shepherd blinked. "I suppose you don't care." Levy lowered his head. Adrian looked toward the dark windows. She had spent 18 years in disaster response work, first coordinating shelter supplies after tornadoes, then running regional deployments, then joining Heartland when it was still small enough for everyone to know who had packed the medical bins. She believed in systems because she had seen what happened without them. Good intentions did not move 400 pounds of donated food across a washed-out bridge. Kindness did not track medication. Compassion did not tell you which dog belonged to which family. After 60 frightened animals arrived in the same afternoon, systems mattered. That was why Colby irritated her. He treated distrust as if it were evidence of wisdom, and yet he kept coming back for one dog he had no legal claim to. The next morning, Adrian opened the duplicate case again. Not because Colby had convinced her. Because the numbers bothered her. The second record came from an Arkansas flood deployment 14 months earlier. Different case ID, different intake name. Same microchip. The animal had been listed as a male German shepherd called Ranger. Adrian checked the audit note. Transfer duplicate, data migration error, reasonable. Heartland had migrated regional records that year. She almost closed the file. Instead, she opened the media archive. Campaign photos were stored separately from veterinary records. Public-facing material had captions, release tags, donor packages, social clips. She searched the Arkansas deployment. Dozens of dogs appeared. Mud-covered Labradors. A hound wrapped in a red blanket. 2 terriers sitting in a plastic laundry tub. Then a German shepherd. Adrian leaned closer. The dog in the photograph stood beside a rescue trailer while a volunteer held the leash. Golden tan, wide black saddle, long-legged. The left ear was visible in profile. The tip folded slightly outward. Adrian sat back. Coincidences had limits. She searched Missouri. A fundraising package from 9 months earlier loaded onto the screen. Winter recovery. Help us bring them home. The campaign featured 5 animals. The third image showed a German shepherd beside a portable heater. Different collar, different angle, different name. But beneath the chin, just visible against the black muzzle, was a pale half-moon patch. Adrian closed the laptop halfway. For the first time, she understood why Colby had stared at the printer as though mistakes deserved suspicion. That realization annoyed her almost as much as the records. She did not call him. Instead, she submitted a request for the archived veterinary data attached to both campaign IDs. Access denied. Adrian frowned. She tried again through the operations portal. Access level insufficient. She checked her permissions. Field Operations Director. Regional Medical Archive access had been included in her role for years. Adrian opened the staff directory to contact systems support. Her phone rang first. The display showed Elliot Bracken. She answered. Elliot. Adrienne. Heard Kentucky's trying to become an inland sea. His voice always sounded faintly amused, even when discussing problems. At 58, Elliot Bracken had built Heartland into the kind of organization governors mentioned during press conferences. He wore polished Navy field vests in disaster zones, remembered donor names after one meeting, and had an unusual gift for making a room believe the next problem was manageable. Adrian had trusted that gift for years. "We've had better weeks," she said. "I saw your archived access request. That was fast. I'm reconciling a microchip issue. Duplicate? Yes. Cyber audit separated operational access from historical veterinary records last quarter. Apparently, the consultants discovered we'd been one bad password away from embarrassing ourselves nationally." Adrian looked at the denied access screen. No one told Field Ops. They probably sent an email with a subject line designed never to be opened. She smiled despite herself. That was Elliot's talent. He could make incompetence sound human. "I can have compliance pull what you need," he continued. "Send the case numbers. I already submitted them." "Good. You're doing exactly what you should." There was no edge in his voice, no warning, no attempt to stop her. "If something doesn't reconcile," Elliot said, "I want to know before anybody outside Heartland does. We survive because people trust our records." The sentence was entirely reasonable. Adrian thanked him. When the call ended, she felt foolish for having been suspicious, for perhaps 10 minutes. Then she looked again at the Missouri photograph. Ranger, another campaign name, same ear, same pale mark, maybe. Not proof, but no longer nothing. 2 days later, County Emergency Management tested the Valley warning sirens at noon. Colby happened to be at the pavilion because Kells had asked him to bring the damp blanket Levy had used at the cabin. The siren rose across the fairgrounds, a long mechanical wail carrying over wet fields. Levy lifted his head, his ears turned toward the sound. Then he lowered his chin again. Colby looked at Kells. She wrote something down. Neither commented. 5 minutes later, a Heartland transport van backed toward the loading doors. Before the driver opened the rear compartment, the vehicle's PA system emitted 3 short electronic tones. Levy folded. There was no gradual anxiety. One moment he was standing. The next his body dropped low, nails scraping against the rubber floor as he pushed toward the back wall. Colby moved instinctively. Kells raised one hand. "Wait." He stopped. Every part of him disliked stopping. Kells watched Levy's breathing, posture, orientation. Adrian came from the operations table when she heard the commotion. "What happened?" Colby nodded toward the van. "Your tones." Adrian looked outside. "They're just a loading alert." Levy pressed himself beneath the edge of the raised cot. Kells wrote again. "County siren at 12:02. Alert response only. No panic behavior." She glanced at the clock. Heartland transport tone at 12:07. Immediate avoidance response. Adrian stared at the dog. "That doesn't prove anything." "No," Kells said. There was no accusation in her voice. "That's why I'm writing it down." Something in Adrian's face changed. Colby recognized the moment because he had lived through versions of it himself. The instant when a fact became uncomfortable enough that explaining it away required more effort than examining it. Colby crouched several feet from Levy. He did not reach under the cot. After a while, the shepherd's amber eyes found him. His breathing slowed, not because Colby had fixed anything, because Colby stayed. Adrian watched that too. Later that afternoon, she returned to the paperwork table and began completing the county's ownership verification packet. Colby came in carrying a replacement pump relay Kells had asked him to look at for the clinic utility room. "You people have discovered a creative way to break simple equipment," he said. Kells called from the back room. "We work with animals. Chaos follows us professionally." Colby set the relay beside Adrian's paperwork. His eyes passed over the forms without interest, then stopped. "Applicant liaison, Adrian Gordon Hart." He looked at the name again. Adrian noticed. "What?" Colby's face had gone completely still. Not tense. Still. "Gordon your middle name?" "Yes." "Family name?" "My father." The pavilion seemed suddenly too bright. "What branch?" Adrian studied him now. "Navy." Colby did not move. "Career?" "Yes." "What did he do?" "Command assignments." "Maritime operations mostly." Her expression sharpened. "Why?" Colby looked at her as if the answer had arrived somewhere far behind her. "What was his name?" Adrian's voice slowed. "Commander Gordon Elias Hart." There were names the mind forgot because forgetting was useful. There were others it preserved with cruel precision. Colby nodded once. "That all?" Adrian asked. "For now." He picked up the replacement relay and walked toward the utility room before she could stop him. That night, the rain had ended. Cold returned over the hills, turning shallow puddles silver beneath a clear sky. Colby sat alone at the workbench in his cabin. The pump test rig was silent. Levy was not there to fill the quiet. For several minutes, Colby looked at the lowest drawer beneath the bench. Then he opened it. Behind old manuals and electrical diagrams sat a rectangular metal box with worn corners. He had not touched it in years. The latch resisted once before opening. Inside lay a few documents, a cloth insignia he no longer displayed, and several photographs bound with a faded rubber band. Colby removed the top one. He was younger in the picture, much younger. The man beside him was taller, lean-faced, smiling slightly at something outside the frame. Commander Gordon Elias Hart. Colby ran one thumb along the photograph's edge. Adrian had her father's eyes. He had not noticed until now. Or perhaps he had simply never expected the past to walk into a livestock pavilion carrying a burnt orange notebook. Colby turned the photograph over. A line had been written on the back in dark ink nearly 3 decades earlier. He did not read it, not yet. He set the photograph upright against the toolbox. Then he sat there in the cold workshop, looking at a man who had once kept a promise that had cost more than Colby had ever known how to repay. Colby avoided Adrian Hart for 2 days, not because he doubted what he had seen in the photograph, because he did not. Commander Gordon Elias Hart had once stood 3 feet from him in a steel compartment while seawater rose around their boots, and alarms turned every voice into noise. Colby remembered the exact shape of the man's hand on his shoulder. He remembered being shoved toward the ladder. He remembered arguing. And he remembered Gordon Hart saying, with absolute calm, "Go." Some memories faded around the edges. That one had only become sharper. So Colby did what he had always done when the past became too specific. He worked. A flood-damaged pressure tank east of town needed replacing. 2 submerged control boxes had to be stripped and dried. A family on a ridge road had water in the basement, but none coming from the kitchen faucet, which Colby considered the sort of insult plumbing specialized in. He stayed out until dark. He did not go to the fairgrounds. On the second evening, Dr. Marjorie Kells called. "Are you planning to continue pretending you don't know where the clinic is?" Colby tightened the last screw on a pump controller. "I know where it is." "Excellent. Then geography is not the problem. What do you need?" "Space." He waited. Kells continued. "The county shelter is receiving 16 more animals tonight from the western drainage. Levy is medically stable enough for temporary foster." Colby stared at the wall of his workshop. "With me? You sound offended. I'm asking. You have heat, clean water, no other animals, reliable transportation, and enough mechanical paranoia to notice if a furnace makes the wrong noise. That last one isn't a qualification. It is in Kentucky in winter." Colby wiped his hands on a rag. "What are the conditions?" There was a pause on the line. Kell's voice changed slightly. Not softer, more attentive. "Come in and I'll show you." An hour later, Colby sat at a folding table inside the clinic with 4 pages in front of him. Temporary foster agreement, medical administration log, county access authorization, movement restriction. He read every line. Kells stood across from him in dark teal scrubs and a gray fleece, arms folded. "You can take him home tonight," she said. "But the county still retains supervisory authority during the hold." "I understand. You document medication." "I understand. You bring him back for examination when scheduled." "I understand. You do not take him outside county jurisdiction without written approval." "I understand. You do not interfere if animal control needs access." Colby looked up. "That one you enjoyed." "A little." He looked back at the paperwork. There had been a time when signing something official had meant structure. Then, over the years, forms had become quieter kinds of doors. VA forms, supplemental forms, review forms, letters saying closed, letters saying incomplete, letters telling him that something he had already sent could not be found. Paper had become a language in which people could fail you without looking at you. His hand remained over the signature line. Kells noticed. She did not rush him. That mattered. "You can say no," she said. Colby looked toward the kennel. Levy was standing behind the gate, watching him. "If I say no, he stays here until I find another approved foster." Colby's jaw tightened. "That crowded? Getting there. So this helps you." "Yes." "And him." "Yes. And you still get to check my house if you want." "I absolutely do." Colby picked up the pen. He signed. Kells took the pages and made copies without celebrating. Colby appreciated that even more. Levy came home before 10. The shepherd stepped from the truck carefully, paused testing the thin crust of new snow beside the workshop. The cold front had returned overnight, leaving the hills white again above flood-brown valleys. Levy sniffed the doorframe, then the workbench, then the pump rig. When Colby switched the motor on briefly, the familiar hum filled the room. Levy's shoulders lowered. He circled twice on the folded blanket beside the tool cabinet and lay down. Colby set the medication log on a clipboard near the refrigerator. The arrangement bothered him, not the dog, the clipboard. A stranger had authority to ask whether Colby gave a tablet at 7 in the morning. Another person could enter his cabin to inspect conditions. If he missed an appointment, someone would call. Once, that would have felt like intrusion. Now Levy slept 10 feet away because those same rules had kept Heartland from taking him. Colby disliked contradictions. They required thinking after he had already decided what he believed. Across town, Adrian was discovering contradictions of her own. The duplicate chip had stopped being isolated. She began checking only records she was authorized to view: campaign IDs, transfer summaries, transport invoices, foster destination fields. Nothing illegal, nothing hidden. At first, the irregularities appeared random. A campaign number that did not match the veterinary transfer number. A dog marked Mauve to foster, with no receiving confirmation attached. An Arkansas transport invoice charged at a rate far above comparable deployments. Then another, and another. Adrian built a list in her burnt orange notebook. Not accusations, questions. She had spent too many years in logistics to mistake messy paperwork for guilt. Disasters produced chaos. People entered data late. Vendors billed incorrectly. Animals were moved before forms caught up, but chaos usually scattered. These inconsistencies seemed to lean in the same direction. She opened Heartland's internal compliance portal and drafted a discrepancy report. 4 pages. No conclusions, only records requiring reconciliation. Before submitting it, she read the report twice, then a third time. Her cursor hovered over send. Heartland had given her the best years of her professional life. After tornadoes in Oklahoma, she had slept on a gymnasium floor for 6 nights because every hotel room within 40 miles was full. After flooding in Iowa, she had watched volunteers build temporary kennel rows before sunrise. She knew people inside Heartland who had missed anniversaries, surgeries, funerals, all because a storm had changed direction. Organizations were not logos. They were people. That was what she had always believed, which meant that if something was wrong, the people inside deserved the truth too. Adrian clicked send. The report vanished into the compliance system. A timestamp appeared. 1842. She closed the laptop. For several seconds, she felt relieved. Then Elliot Bracken called. Adrienne. His voice was measured, almost warm. Elliot, I just saw your discrepancy submission. Again, very fast. I thought compliance reviewed those. They do. Anything touching multiple deployments gets escalated. Adrian leaned against the operations table. I found repeated mismatches, so I gathered there was no irritation in his tone. That made her more careful. Some go back more than a year. Yes. And some involve transport vendors. Yes, a pause. Then Elliot asked, what made you start looking at old campaigns? Adrian stared at the black window beyond the pavilion. Not what did you find? Why were you looking? The Kentucky dog. Livy. She noticed he knew the temporary name. Yes, the duplicate chip. That started it. Elliot sighed quietly. Good work. Send compliance anything else you find within your normal scope. Don't spend deployment hours becoming an accountant. The joke landed gently. Adrian did not smile. Of course, you're doing exactly what I expect from you. The call ended. Adrian remained still for several moments. The conversation contained no threat, no instruction to stop, no obvious lie. Yet something about the question stayed with her. Why were you looking? Not what went wrong. Why did you notice? That night, Colby woke on the floor of the workshop. He did not know at first how he had gotten there. The room was dark except for the low amber light above the tool bench. His back rested against a cabinet. His breathing came too fast. Not panic exactly. Something older. His mind had returned to metal walls, alarms, rising water, Gordon Hart's hand on his shoulder. Go! Colby pressed both palms against the floor. Cold concrete, workshop, Kentucky. Now, the facts were correct. His body did not care. A soft sound came from near the door. Levy stood there. The shepherd did not rush toward him, did not paw, did not whine. He walked across the room, turned once, and lowered himself beside Colby's boots. That was all. Colby stared at the dog. Levy rested his chin against one foreleg. His flank rose. Fell, rose, fell. Colby matched the rhythm without deciding to. After a while, he put one hand into the thick fur behind Levy's shoulder. Warm, real, present. The dog did not look at him. Colby preferred it that way. "You're not trained for this," he whispered. Levy's ear shifted. "Neither am I." For the first time in years, Colby understood something without wanting to argue with it. He had pulled Levy from a flooded vehicle, but rescue had not stayed pointed in one direction. The next afternoon, Adrian came to Kell's clinic carrying forms for the ownership review. Colby was already there for Levy's scheduled examination. Kells checked weight, hydration, gums. Pause. "Improving," she said. Levy tolerated the examination, then returned immediately to Colby's side. Adrian watched. "You signed the foster agreement." Colby looked at her. "Kells threatened me with administrative competence." "I heard." Kells, writing at the counter, said, "I can still hear both of you." Adrian almost smiled. Colby did not. Not because of her, because Gordon Hart stood invisibly between them now. Adrian opened her notebook while Kells completed the medical form. She made a note beside the transport section. "My father used to hate paperwork," she said absently. Colby's attention sharpened. Adrian kept writing. "He always said the Navy could turn one simple promise into 12 signatures." Colby looked away. He also used to write the same sentence at the end of almost every letter when he was deployed. Kells handed her a page. Adrian glanced at it, then continued. "A promise is only real when keeping it costs you something." The room narrowed. Colby heard rain that was not falling. Metal under boots, Gordon Hart's voice. "Not loud, never loud." Adrian noticed his face. "What?" Colby stared at the floor. There were truths a person withheld because they belonged to someone else. And there were truths withheld because saying them would require admitting what survival had done to you. He had spent almost 30 years pretending he knew the difference. "Your father was my commanding officer." Adrian stopped. Kells quietly moved toward the back room. She did not announce that she was giving them privacy. That was why it worked. Adrian's notebook remained open in her hands. "What did you say?" "Commander Hart was my commanding officer." "You knew him?" "Yes." "How well?" Colby swallowed. "Well enough." Her eyes changed. Not softer, sharper. "You recognized the name 2 days ago." "Yes," and said nothing. "I wasn't sure what to say." "You could have started with that." Colby accepted the hit because it was fair. Adrian closed the notebook. "What happened to him?" "You know the official version. I know he disappeared during an operation. I know what the Navy told my family. I'm asking what you know." Colby looked through the clinic window at a field crusted in snow. "He got me out." Adrian said nothing. There was flooding in a compartment, equipment failure. Everything happened fast. "He put me on the exit route. And then he went back." Her jaw tightened. "For who?" "Others. And you left." The words were not cruel. They still hurt. "I followed the order." Adrian looked at him for a long time. "Did you ever meet my mother?" "No." "Did you know where we lived?" "Yes." That answer changed the room. Adrian stepped back. "So you knew we existed?" "Yes." "For almost 30 years?" "Yes, and never came." Colby had imagined this conversation in different forms without admitting it. In every version, he had a better answer. Reality offered only the true one. "I didn't know how to stand in front of his family and explain why I came home." Adrian's eyes filled, but her voice remained level. "Maybe you didn't need to explain." Colby looked at her. "That wasn't your decision to make." He had no defense against that either. Adrian picked up her notebook. She did not forgive him. She did not thank him. She only said, "If you remember something about my father, don't decide for me whether I can hear it." Then she left. Levy leaned lightly against Colby's leg. Not enough to comfort. Enough to be there. Later that evening, Adrian opened the Heartland Operations portal from her motel room. She wanted to attach 2 additional transport records to the discrepancy report. The veterinary archive icon was gone. She checked permissions. Regional historical files, restricted. Vendor attachments, restricted. Legacy campaign transfer records, restricted. 3 days earlier, she had been able to access all of them. Adrian refreshed the page. Nothing changed. No error message, no explanation. Only fewer doors than yesterday. She closed the laptop slowly. The duplicate microchip could still have been a mistake. The missing foster confirmations could still have been poor bookkeeping. The transport invoices could still have been inflated by disaster pricing. But someone had decided that the person asking those questions should now be allowed to see less. For the first time, Adrian stopped asking whether Heartland had made an error. She began asking who needed the errors to remain unexplained. Adrian Hart drafted the post at 1:17 in the morning. She did not call it an accusation. She called it a request for accountability. 3 paragraphs, no dramatic language, no names beyond Heartland flood pause. She wrote that discrepancies had appeared across multiple disaster deployments and that records concerning animal transfers, vendor billing, and campaign identities required independent review. She read it 4 times. Then she reached for post. Don't. Colby's voice came from behind her. Adrian turned sharply. They were in the small office Dr. Kells had borrowed inside the Fairgrounds Administration Building. The livestock pavilion had finally gone quiet across the parking lot. Snow tapped lightly against the window. Colby stood in the doorway, wearing a dark work jacket over a faded olive thermal shirt. Levi sat beside his boots, the shepherd's dark saddle shining under the fluorescent light. Adrian closed the laptop halfway. You've spent weeks telling me Heartland can't be trusted. I said I don't trust it. That distinction feels thin tonight. You post that now. Everybody inside who has something to hide learns exactly what you know. They already limited my access. Then somebody already knows you're asking questions. That is exactly why this needs daylight. Colby entered the room. No, daylight comes after you know where the doors are. Adrian stared at him. Coming from the man who thinks institutions exist to lose paperwork, that is remarkable. I've had time to reconsider my relationship with irony. She almost laughed. Almost. Colby pointed toward the laptop. If you're wrong, you damage people who may have done nothing. If you are right, you warn the people who did. Adrian leaned back in the chair. And what do you suggest? Find somebody whose job is to care whether the numbers are real. That answer surprised both of them. Colby looked away first. Dr. Kells, who had been standing in the hall holding a mug of tea, said, I know somebody. By 10 the next morning, Owen Cates arrived from the state office. Colby disliked him immediately. It had nothing to do with Owen's personality. That would have required Owen to display one. He was 51, compact and slightly built, wearing a charcoal field coat over a brown wool sweater and gray trousers that looked too tidy for the fairgrounds. His black hair was turning silver at the sides and parted with old-fashioned precision. Thin black-framed glasses rested halfway down his nose while he read. He carried no tactical bag, no badge on a chain, no performance, only a waterproof messenger case and a silver mechanical pencil. Adrian spent 40 minutes explaining the duplicate microchip, the restricted access, the missing foster confirmations, and the transport invoices. Owen wrote. He asked for dates. She gave them. He asked what she personally observed. She answered. He asked what she inferred. Adrian paused before answering that one. Colby stood near the window with Levy. Finally, Owen looked at him. You're Mr. Renshaw? Yes. Former Navy? Colby's expression flattened slightly. Yes. Owen nodded as if Colby had told him he once worked at a tire shop. You believe Heartland is concealing something? I do. Why? The dog's condition, the records, the loading tones, their people. Owen raised one finger. Which part can you prove? Colby went still. Adrian glanced toward him. Owen waited, not aggressively. That somehow made it worse. Colby said, the dog's physical condition is documented. Good. The microchip appears under multiple cases. Good. The rest needs checking. Owen made another note. That's better. Colby folded his arms. You always talk to people like they're malfunctioning equipment, only when they provide conclusions before specifications. Dr. Kells coughed into her mug. It sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Owen spent the afternoon sorting Adrian's material into 3 columns. Verified requires independent confirmation. Opinion. Nothing moved columns because anyone felt strongly about it. Adrian found the process maddening. Then, slowly, reassuring. Her internal emails showed she had reported discrepancies before her access was restricted. Campaign case IDs showed inconsistencies. Vendor names could be checked independently. The microchip records existed outside Heartland's public media archive. Owen did not tell them what it meant. He began sending requests. That evening, Colby sat across from him at a folding table covered with invoices. I don't understand why you need me here, Colby said. I'm told you understand pumps, trailers, generators, and what it takes to keep water moving. That doesn't make me an accountant. Good. I already have those. Owen slid a page across the table. A temporary shelter campaign in Missouri claimed 128 dogs in care for 11 days. Colby scanned the equipment list. 2 portable water tanks, 1,000 gallons each. Scheduled refills every 3 days. He looked again. What? Owen asked. Colby tapped the paper. This isn't enough water. For the dogs? For the dogs, cleaning, bowls, staff hand washing, anything. Not at those numbers. Could they have used municipal water? Maybe. Then we check. Owen wrote a note. Next came a transport invoice. Colby studied the trailer model. No. No what? They didn't move this many crates in that trailer. Why? Payload and floor space. Estimate? Colby took Owen's pencil before realizing he had done it. He drew a crude rectangle. This model gives you roughly this much usable floor once the divider and ventilation housing are in. Even stacking legal crate sizes within animal welfare limits, you don't reach the number they build. Owen looked at the drawing. You certain? Enough to ask the manufacturer. Good, he wrote that down too. The third discrepancy involved generator hours and diesel delivery. This one took Colby less than a minute. Impossible. Owen looked up. Colby pointed to the rental unit model. At this load, it burns more fuel than this. Either the generator didn't run the hours they claimed, or somebody found diesel that never showed up on the invoice. Could be another supplier. Could be. Owen's pencil moved. That was the pattern. Colby did not solve anything. He eliminated comfortable explanations. Over the next several days, Owen's formal requests began returning answers. Municipal water had not been available at the Missouri shelter during the dates Heartland listed. The trailer manufacturer confirmed Colby's capacity estimate. Fuel suppliers showed no secondary deliveries corresponding to the generator logs. Veterinary invoices supported treatment of far fewer animals than campaign materials claimed. Owen expanded the checks. What emerged was not the simple picture Colby had expected. That bothered him. Heartland had rescued animals, hundreds of them. There were legitimate veterinary bills, legitimate transport runs, volunteers who had worked brutal hours, families who had been reunited with pets. Dr. Kells reviewed several records and said quietly, "These are real." Adrian looked at her. "I know." The words carried more weight than if everything had been fake, because Heartland was not an empty shell. It contained good work. That made the bad work harder to see. Vendor relationships became the next problem. Several logistics companies charged Heartland rates, far above regional competitors. Ownership records showed layered business connections. Not proof of wrongdoing by themselves, but enough for Owen to request more. One company billed for temporary kennels that could not be matched to site photographs. Another invoiced emergency transport mileage inconsistent with fuel purchases. Animals listed as transferred to foster partners sometimes had no receiving signature. Several campaign stories reused photographs across different deployments. Adrian sat at the end of the table watching Owen pin dates along a whiteboard. "I saw some of these." No one answered immediately. She pointed to an old case. "Not this exact invoice, but missing confirmations, late updates, duplicate photos." Colby watched her face. "I told myself it was disaster paperwork." "Sometimes it was," Owen said. Adrian looked at him. "That doesn't help. It isn't supposed to." She stood and walked toward the window. Outside, Levi was lying beside Colby's truck while a county volunteer cleared snow from the walkway. Adrian rubbed both hands together. "I keep asking myself whether I did anything illegal." Owen said nothing. She looked back. "That's the easy question, isn't it?" Colby understood before she finished. Adrian's voice dropped. "The harder one is whether I saw enough to ask sooner and chose not to because believing the explanation was easier." Owen set down his pencil. "That is not a question my office can answer for you." "No." Adrian looked at the whiteboard again. "I know." That became the line she crossed. Until then, she had been trying to determine whether Heartland had betrayed her. Now she began asking whether loyalty had ever made her useful to the wrong people. The investigation widened quietly. Owen prepared preservation requests for digital records and vendor communications. He contacted specialists who could trace financial relationships Adrian had no authority to access. No one announced anything publicly. Colby found the secrecy irritating, But every morning Owen returned. Every afternoon there were more documents. No promises, just work. Then, on Thursday night, the temperature dropped below freezing again. Snow began shortly after 10. By midnight, it was covering the brown scars left by the flood, softening roads, roofs, parking lots. At 1:46 a.m., Colby's phone rang. "Dr. Kells." He answered immediately. "You watching local alerts?" "No." "Turn them on." Colby switched on the small television. Above the workshop refrigerator, a red banner crossed the bottom of the screen. "Structure fire. Industrial Storage District." The camera feed showed orange light behind falling snow. Colby straightened. Kells said, "That warehouse is leased by Heartland." Levy lifted his head from the blanket. Colby turned up the volume. The reporter spoke from behind a road closure. Fire crews had contained the incident. No injuries had been reported. The building was used for storage, including archived materials associated with ongoing regional relief operations. Colby closed his eyes once. "Paper records. That's what Adrian says. Where is she?" "With Owen." Did anybody know they were requesting preservation? Kells' silence answered nothing, and that was important. By dawn, investigators had still not declared a cause. Owen refused to speculate. Colby wanted him to. "What are the odds?" he asked. "I don't calculate odds without facts. A warehouse holding records burns after questions start." "Yes, and that doesn't interest you." "It interests me enormously." Owen adjusted his glasses. "That is different from proving why it happened." Colby hated him a little less for that answer. At 8:15, Elliot Bracken appeared on local television. He stood outside Heartland's Temporary Operations Center, wearing a navy-quilted vest over a pale blue shirt. Snow rested on the shoulders of volunteers behind him. His expression was tired, controlled, credible. He thanked firefighters. He said nobody had been hurt. He reminded viewers that Heartland had continued caring for displaced animals through flood, ice, and now the loss of a storage facility. He did not mention Adrian. He did not mention the investigation. He did not blame anyone. "We've always believed difficult moments show people what a community is made of," Bracken said. "We'll replace paperwork. We'll replace equipment. What matters is that the animals in our care still need food, warmth, and medical support." A donation link appeared beneath the broadcast. Adrian watched from across the room. Within 20 minutes, the Heartland campaign total began climbing. 5,000, 9,000, 14. Comments flooded beneath the live stream. Prayers, support, promises to donate blankets. People thanking Heartland for staying strong. None of those people were foolish. They simply knew the version of Heartland they had been shown. Colby watched the number rise. For years he had believed institutions failed because they buried truth beneath paperwork. Now he saw something more complicated. Sometimes truth could be sitting on the table in front of you and still lose to the better story. Levy walked over and rested near his chair. Colby looked at the whiteboard covered in numbers. For the first time he understood that being right was not the same as winning, and the truth, by itself, had never promised otherwise. The warehouse fire did not erase the case. That was the first thing Owen Cates said the next morning. It was also the first thing Colby did not believe. They stood in a borrowed conference room at the county administration building, while snow melted from their boots onto a rubber mat near the door. Adrian sat at the end of the table with her burnt orange notebook open. Dr. Kells had come only long enough to deliver veterinary documentation before returning to the temporary clinic. Owen placed 3 folders in front of them. Cloud records were placed under preservation before the fire. Colby looked at the folders. And payment data? Some of it. Vendor communications? Requests are pending. Animal transfer paperwork. Owen paused. That is where we took the biggest loss. Several paper archive boxes had contained original intake sheets, signatures, handwritten transport notes, and records connecting animal IDs to subcontractors. Whatever survived the fire was being cataloged. Much of it would not be useful. Colby leaned back. So somebody gets exactly what they need. That is not what I said. It is what happened. Owen removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The fire investigator found details inconsistent with the initial assumption of a simple electrical fault. Adrian looked up. So it was deliberate? No. Colby's jaw tightened. You just said, I said the initial explanation does not account for everything. I did not say anyone has established cause. Owen put his glasses back on. The distinction matters. To whoever burned it? To everyone. Colby stood. He had heard versions of that sentence before. Procedure matters. Review takes time. The file is being processed. Please allow 30 days. Then 60. Then start again. He looked at Owen and felt an old anger trying to wear a new face. If somebody is moving records while you wait for perfect certainty, we are not waiting. It looks like waiting. Owen's expression did not change. Knowing somebody may be running does not give us permission to run the wrong direction to catch them. The words landed badly. Colby pushed away from the table. That is exactly what people say right before nobody gets held responsible. Adrian watched him carefully. Owen did not argue. He opened another folder. Yesterday I confirmed 2 vendor addresses, requested additional banking records, and obtained preservation of 3 data accounts. This morning I have calls scheduled with 2 transport contractors and a software vendor. He looked at Colby. I am not asking you to enjoy the pace. Colby said nothing. I am asking you to notice that the work did not stop. That was harder to dismiss. Colby walked to the window. Outside, county crews were pushing dirty snow from the parking lot. He waited for Owen to offer reassurance. Owen did not. He simply returned to the paperwork. That bothered Colby less than reassurance would have. Over the next 3 days, the case moved in ways that did not photograph well. No doors opened dramatically. No one confessed. There were phone calls, invoices, insurance checks, maintenance records. A payment processor confirmed dates. A fuel company forwarded delivery logs. An accountant requested clarification on a vendor ownership structure that looked ordinary until 3 separate addresses led back to the same registered agent. Colby began to understand why Owen carried a pencil instead of a speech. The man did not promise the truth would win. He only kept making it harder for the truth to be ignored. Colby returned to his own work. Floodwater had receded from most roads, but wells across the lower valley remained contaminated or unreliable. His truck moved from farmhouse to church to temporary shelter, carrying pressure switches, filter housings, spare pipe, bleach test strips, and more fittings than any reasonable person should own. Late one afternoon, another pickup was parked outside his cabin when he returned. Colby recognized it immediately. He considered driving past his own house. Then Harlan Vick climbed out. At 62, Harlan looked less like a veteran's advocate than a man who might repair porch steps in exchange for pie. He was broad through the middle, with a neat gray mustache, warm brown eyes, and a burgundy knit cap pulled over short white-gray hair. A dark brown insulated coat covered his familiar red plaid flannel shirt. He lifted 2 cardboard boxes from the bed of his truck. Before you complain, Harlan said, these are not for you. That improves the visit. Water filters. Colby took 1 box. For who? 3 houses off Millstone Road. Their wells are technically functioning and emotionally compromised. Colby looked inside. Replacement cartridges. Sediment filters. 2 compact purification units. You could have dropped them at the shelter. I could have. Harlan carried the 2nd box toward the workshop. Neither mentioned the VA. That was unusual. For years, Harlan had periodically tried to persuade Colby to bring in his paperwork. 3 times, Colby had received notices showing a claim or review as closed. 3 times, he had put the envelopes in a drawer and decided the message was clear enough. Harlan disagreed. Colby refused to discuss it. Eventually, Harlan stopped asking. Inside the workshop, Levi came over from his blanket. The German shepherd had gained enough weight that his ribs no longer showed sharply beneath the golden and black coat. The pale half-moon under his chin was clearer now, and the tip of his left ear still folded outward as though it had made a private decision about symmetry. Harlan offered the back of his hand. Levi sniffed, then returned to Colby. Smart dog, Harlan said. Questionable standards. Harlan smiled. He helped stack the filter boxes beside the workbench. You're doing emergency repairs for free? Some. That sounds suspiciously community-minded. Don't spread it around. I'll protect your reputation. Harlan turned toward the door. No forms appeared. No advice. That unsettled Colby more than another argument would have. At the threshold, Harlan stopped. If you ever decide you want to know what those 3 closed notices actually meant, I still have a key to the office." Colby's face hardened out of habit. Harlan raised one hand. "Not today." Then he left. Colby stood inside the workshop listening to the pickup disappear down the road. Levy sat beside him. On the bench, beneath a stack of pump catalogs, Colby knew exactly where the 3 VA envelopes were. He did not take them out. But for the first time in years, he thought about the difference between a locked door and a door he had stopped trying. The Heartland case found its next direction through something far less personal. Adrian remembered paper. She was sitting with Owen near dusk, reconstructing deployment procedures from memory, when she stopped halfway through describing a storm response in Iowa. "Wait," Owen looked up. "What? When we lost cell coverage, field teams didn't upload intake directly. That seems obvious." "No. I mean, we didn't rely on digital records at all." She stood and began pacing. "Carbon copy transport manifests, offline intake sheets, paper microchip lists, veterinary transfer packets. Where did they go?" "Mobile logistics." Owen's pencil stopped. Adrian turned toward him. Each deployment had trailers acting as temporary records hubs. Teams dropped physical packets there until someone reconciled them with the main system. Were those papers later sent to the warehouse? Eventually. Supposed to be. Supposed to be? Adrian was already opening an accounting file. Deployments overlap. Sometimes trailers come back with unresolved boxes still inside. Owen leaned closer. They found the asset 20 minutes later. A mobile logistics trailer appeared in older equipment expenses and maintenance invoices, but not in the current fleet list. Asset number HFP-27. Adrian frowned. "I know that unit. When did you last see it?" "Months ago." Heartland's written response said HFP-27 had suffered structural damage and been removed from service before the Kentucky deployment. Owen checked insurance records. No damage claim. He checked disposal records. No sale, no salvage receipt, no transfer of title. Colby, who had arrived after finishing a pump repair, looked over Owen's shoulder. "So it still exists, maybe. Or somebody forgot paperwork." Owen looked at him. Colby sighed. "I know, we check." For once, Owen almost smiled. The next morning, Owen spoke with a fleet supervisor who had worked the early days of the Kentucky deployment. The man did not remember where HFP-27 ended up, but he remembered moving it. Before the first flood crest, several trailers had been hauled from low-storage lots to higher ground. HFP-27 had gone somewhere east of the main staging area. "Somewhere" was not useful. The records around it were. Maintenance invoices placed the trailer near a service garage 2 weeks before the flood. Fuel receipts showed a Heartland tow vehicle operating along the same corridor. GPS logs from that vehicle contained several gaps during the storm, likely caused by poor coverage. Owen began mapping possible sites: old feed depots, disused equipment yards, a former aggregate facility. 3 locations remained plausible. For Colby, the case stopped being a theory about wrongdoing and became something stranger. A map with limits, things that could be checked. That afternoon he took Levy to Dr. Kells for another examination. The dog tolerated the scale with mild offense and accepted the stethoscope with less dignity. "Weight is up," Kells said. "Hydration good. Still doesn't like crates. We're not forcing that yet." She checked one paw. "Overall, better." Colby nodded. He intended to stay through the appointment. Then his phone rang. A temporary shelter on the far side of town had lost water pressure. Dozens of people were using the facility. Their storage tanks would last a few hours. Colby looked at Levy, then at Kells. "I can come back." Kells straightened. "No, the appointment. I am a veterinarian, remember? I've heard rumors. Go do your job." Colby hesitated. Levy stood between them, wearing his moss-green collar. Kells held out her hand for the leash. It was ridiculous how difficult the motion became. The dog was safe. Kells had protected him before Colby had any legal right to. She knew his medical history. She had no intention of surrendering him to anyone. Colby knew all of this. Knowing and releasing were not the same act. Levy looked up at him. Colby handed Kells the leash. "Call me if. I know your number. If anything changes, I know." He crouched once and touched Levy behind the shoulder, then stood. Kells did not say, "See, nothing happened." She simply took the leash. Colby left. Halfway to the shelter, he realized he had not turned the truck around. That mattered. By evening, the shelter's water system was running again. When Colby returned, Levi was asleep near Kell's desk. The dog lifted his head at the sound of the door, rose, and walked toward him. No panic, no punishment. Colby clipped the leash back onto the collar. Kells handed him the medical sheet. "See you next week." That was all. Trust, Colby was learning, was rarely dramatic enough to deserve music. The final break came after dark. One of Owen's vendor calls produced a delivery receipt for generator fuel. The driver remembered the location because the road had been bad and the destination strange. An old quarry access road east of the highway, used as an equipment staging area during the first flood warning. Owen placed the receipt beside the map. 3 possible sites became 2. Adrian checked the weather forecast. Another warm front was approaching. Heavy rain would arrive over the remaining snowpack by late morning. Colby studied the 2 locations. Both sat behind low creek crossings. "If those creeks rise again," he said, "you may lose the roads." "How long?" Owen asked. Colby looked toward the dark windows. "Depends on the rain." Outside, water had begun dripping from the icicles along the roof. Not quickly, yet. Owen folded the map. "We start early." Colby looked at him. No speeches. No promise that tomorrow would solve anything. Just the next correct step. For once, Colby found that enough. By 6 in the morning, rain had begun tapping against the remaining snow. Not hard yet. That was the problem. Warm rain in the Cumberland Hills rarely announced what it intended to become. Owen Cates stood beside 2 county vehicles at the edge of an old service road, holding a printed map beneath the raised hatch of an SUV. Gray daylight seeped through bare trees. Snow remained in the shaded places, while the exposed ground had already turned to black mud. 2 county deputies were with him, along with a state investigator who handled digital evidence. Colby had expected Owen to tell him to stay home. Instead, Owen had called before dawn. "You know these roads?" "Some." "Good. That is the only reason you are coming." Colby looked at the phone. "You have a gift for gratitude. I have a gift for boundaries." Adrian rode in the second vehicle because she could identify Heartland equipment, fleet numbers, and logistics markings that might mean nothing to anyone outside the organization. Levi came with Colby for a different reason. Dr. Kells had examined him the previous afternoon and found no medical reason to keep him at the clinic. The temporary foster condition still applied, but the shepherd no longer required continuous monitoring. Owen had asked one question. "Is the dog being brought to search?" "No," Colby answered. "Track? No. Locate property?" "No." Owen nodded. "Then he stays with you and does not become evidence with pause." Colby found that description irritatingly accurate. Their first location sat behind a disused feed warehouse near a rail spur that had not carried anything in years. The property looked promising on paper. Old commercial access. Enough room for trailers, high ground above the first flood line. It was also empty. One equipment shed stood with its doors hanging crooked. Inside were rusted pallets, broken shelving, and the remains of a compressor that looked as though it had surrendered sometime during the previous governor's administration. No Heartland trailer. No recent tire impressions clear enough to matter. No boxes. Adrian walked the perimeter once. HFP 27 would have a white body, blue lower stripe, tandem axle, Heartland paw mark near the rear. One deputy looked at the collapsed shed. If it's here, somebody folded it very small. No one laughed much. Owen photographed the site, recorded what they had checked, then sent everyone back to the vehicles. Colby appreciated that. He had known men who believed a failed search meant searching harder in the same wrong place. Owen simply crossed off the site. One possibility gone. That was progress too. The second location lay farther east beyond an old aggregate quarry. The county road climbed for several miles, then dropped toward a creek crossing where the pavement narrowed between rock and trees. By the time they arrived, the rain had strengthened. Water spread across the access road. Not much, perhaps 6 inches over the lowest point. But it moved quickly, brown and carrying small branches. Owen stopped before the crossing. Colby stepped out and studied the water. Higher than it was an hour ago. "We can cross?" one deputy asked. "Probably." Owen looked at Colby. "Probably is not the word I use when I'm responsible for 4 vehicles," Colby almost argued. Then he looked upstream. Rainwater was already building along the banks. Owen was right. That remained an inconvenient habit. "We find another route," Owen said. Adrian unfolded a county map across the hood. "There isn't one marked." Colby examined the ridge. Something about the shape of the hillside bothered him. He had worked near this quarry years ago, replacing a deep well pump for a contractor who had complained for 2 days about gravel dust getting into everything. There had been another access. He could almost see it. Almost was worthless. Owen was already calling the county office for older road records when an engine sounded from somewhere beyond the trees. A utility vehicle appeared on the county road above them. White, blue stripe, Heartland logo on the door. Adrian straightened. The vehicle did not stop. It was not doing anything suspicious. It traveled along the open road at normal speed, carrying 2 workers in Heartland jackets. Then its roof-mounted PA unit sounded. 3 short tones. Beep, beep, beep. A recorded announcement followed, distorted by rain. Levy changed beside Colby. The shepherd did not pull. He did not bark. His body simply became rigid. His breathing quickened. Both ears turned toward the sound, including the left one with its slightly folded tip. Then his head shifted toward the ridge east of the flooded crossing. Colby crouched beside him. "Easy." Adrian was staring after the vehicle. "That's the load tone." Owen ended his call. "The same one from the fairgrounds?" "Yes." "What does that tell us?" Adrian looked at Levy. "That Heartland still has vehicles using the system." "Nothing more?" "No." Colby appreciated her answer. 3 weeks earlier, either of them might have tried to turn discomfort into certainty. Now they knew better. Levy remained facing the ridge. Colby followed the line of his gaze. Not because he believed the dog knew where the trailer was, because the angle finally pulled an old memory into focus. "Wait." Owen looked at him. "There used to be another quarry road." "Used to?" "Came in behind that ridge from the north side. Service access for aggregate trucks before the lower road was widened." "It's not on this map." "It wouldn't be." "Why?" "Company closed. County stopped maintaining it. Part of the right-of-way got absorbed when parcels changed." Owen did not tell anyone to move. He called the county records office. That was the difference between Owen and Colby. Colby remembered a road and wanted to use it. Owen remembered that a road was also a legal boundary. 23 minutes later, a cadastral map arrived by email. There it was, a narrow recorded access easement, curling behind the ridge to an old aggregate depot. The road had disappeared from newer transportation maps. It had not disappeared from the land. Owen looked at Colby. "You certain you can identify the entrance?" "No." Owen raised an eyebrow. Colby pointed north. "But I know where to start." They found it behind a curtain of winter bear sumac and young pine. The entrance looked like a drainage cut until one deputy noticed old compacted gravel beneath the leaves. The team moved slowly. No sirens, no dramatic approach. Just tires working through mud while rain whispered against roofs. Levy lay on the rear seat of Colby's truck, alert but no longer trembling. Adrian rode beside Colby. For several minutes neither spoke. Then she said, "My father would have hated this road." Colby glanced at her. "He hated mud. He wrote my mother once that mud was proof the earth had a personal grudge." Colby smiled before he could stop himself. Adrian noticed. "Did he say things like that around you?" "Worse?" She waited. Colby understood the invitation. Not demand. Invitation. He used to complain that coffee aboard ship was strong enough to negotiate its own treaty. Adrian looked through the windshield. That sounds like him. It was the first story Colby had given her that did not involve Gordon Hart's final mission. Nothing heroic, nothing tragic. Just coffee. For some reason that seemed harder. Adrian said thank you. Colby nodded. The road climbed. No forgiveness passed between them. Something smaller did. That was enough for the moment. The aggregate depot appeared beyond a stand of cedar, concrete pads, a weathered maintenance building, 2 empty fuel cages, and behind the building, partially screened by a corrugated metal wall, a white tandem axle trailer with a faded blue stripe. Adrian inhaled. "That's Heartland." Owen held up a hand. Nobody approached. From 50 yards away, one deputy used binoculars. "Rear number is covered. Can you see any of it?" "Last digit looks like 7. Adrian stared. "HFP 27. "Looks like," Owen corrected. The rain thickened. Water began running in narrow streams across the gravel. Colby looked toward the road behind them. "If that lower drainage fills, Getting anything out of here becomes difficult. Owen was already on the phone. The existing authority covered inspection related to the identified search corridor, but the newly discovered asset and specific depot required additional legal authorization before the team could enter or seize anything inside. Colby hated every second of waiting. The trailer sat there. 20 yards of open ground, and a legal line might as well have been 20 miles. A dark pickup passed on a distant ridge road. Everyone watched it. It continued without turning. 10 minutes. 20. Rain intensified. One deputy checked the creek crossing farther back and reported the water had risen several inches. Colby paced once, then stopped. Owen remained beneath the hatch of the county vehicle, speaking with the prosecutor and sending photographs. Adrian stood beside him, confirming fleet characteristics. Nobody behaved as though urgency did not exist. They simply refused to let urgency become permission. 41 minutes after the trailer was first sighted, Owen lowered his phone. Approved. The depot was entered under the expanded warrant. The trailer identification was confirmed. HFP 27. Inside, nothing looked important. That was the first impression. Cardboard record boxes lined one side. Plastic file tubs sat beneath a narrow folding table. 2 older laptops were secured in padded cases. There were stacks of carbon copy forms, binders, microchip sheets, vendor invoices, fuel logs, transfer packets, dry paper, dust, staples, the least cinematic objects Colby could imagine. The digital evidence investigator began documenting the contents before anything was moved. Owen read box labels. Missouri. Adrian looked over his shoulder. Arkansas. Another box. Tennessee. Nobody celebrated. The work became slower. Photograph. Log. Seal. Identify. Adrian was called forward only when investigators needed help interpreting Heartland codes. One sheet stopped her. She read it twice, then handed it to Owen. Animal identifier. Campaign identifier. Microchip. Disposition. The chip number belonged to Levy, but the name did not. Owen found another sheet. Same chip, another name. Then a third, then a fourth. 4 campaign IDs, 4 public identities, 1 animal. Adrian sat down on the edge of the folding table. Colby watched her. She had suspected this. Seeing suspicion become paper did not make it easier. 4, she said. Owen nodded. Documented. Nearby, the investigator opened vendor files. Those mattered more. Contract numbers matched companies Owen had already been examining. Ownership records collected through official requests connected several vendors through shared officers, registered agents, and financial relationships that ultimately circled toward people close to Heartland leadership. Not one magic invoice, a pattern. Owen looked at Colby. This is what we needed. Colby studied the boxes. This paper, he almost laughed. By afternoon, coordinated searches had begun at several Heartland-related locations under separate legal authority. Records were secured. Digital accounts were preserved. Financial institutions and payment processors received appropriate orders concerning specific accounts under investigation. Heartland's winter fundraising broadcast was already scheduled. Bracken appeared on camera at 5. Charcoal suit, white shirt, silver paw pin. Behind him, a screen showed photographs of rescued animals while a donation total climbed. Adrian watched from a county vehicle parked outside the investigation site. She had been offered no microphone. She had asked for none. Colby sat behind the wheel of his truck nearby with Levy in the passenger seat. On Adrian's phone, the live stream continued. Bracken spoke about rebuilding after the warehouse fire, about trust, about communities keeping promises. Then the donation portal stopped updating. The screen refreshed. A small message replaced the payment form. Transactions temporarily unavailable. Bracken continued speaking for several seconds before someone approached from outside the camera frame and handed him a piece of paper. He read it. Nothing dramatic happened. His shoulders did not collapse. He did not shout. He simply stopped for half a beat. A man who had spent years turning compassion into numbers had finally encountered numbers he could no longer control. The broadcast cut to a holding graphic. From somewhere across the staging yard, a Heartland vehicle shut down. Its PA system emitted the familiar 3 tones before losing power. Levy stiffened. The shepherd's breathing quickened. Colby placed one hand against the warm fur behind his shoulder. He did not say the danger was gone. He did not know that. He did not say everything was finished. It was not. He only stayed there until Levy looked at him. "You're all right," Colby said quietly. Levy's ears shifted. Colby looked toward the darkening hills, rain streaking the windshield. "We don't have to go anywhere." After several seconds, Levy lowered himself onto the seat. Outside, investigators carried sealed boxes from the depot one at a time. No applause, no victory line, just people doing the next piece of work. For Colby, that had begun to mean something. Heartland Flood Paws did not disappear the day its donation portal stopped working. Organizations were not buildings that vanished when someone switched off the lights. They were contracts, employees, foster agreements, bank accounts, leased trucks, animals already placed in temporary care, and people who still needed answers on Monday morning. For several weeks, the investigation grew outward. Partner rescues took over legitimate placements so animals already in Heartland's care would not become collateral damage in a financial case. County agencies reviewed transfer records. Veterinary partners were contacted one by one. Employees were interviewed separately. Some had known nothing. That mattered. Colby had expected corruption to look cleaner from the outside. It did not. One Heartland coordinator had spent 11 years sleeping on gym floors during hurricanes and tornadoes and had never touched a false invoice. A volunteer driver had transported animals across 3 states without knowing that numbers attached to his routes had later been inflated. A kennel worker had kept meticulous medication logs that eventually helped investigators prove other records had been altered farther up the chain. Good people had been working inside a damaged structure. Colby found that inconvenient. He was getting used to inconvenient truths. Elliot Bracken was eventually charged in connection with charitable fraud, false records, financial self-dealing, and related matters supported by the expanding evidence. Not every allegation became a charge. Not every dollar was recovered. Several related investigations remained open. Owen Cates refused to predict outcomes. When Colby asked once how long the entire thing would take, Owen looked over his glasses and said, "Longer than a television audience would tolerate." Colby almost liked him by then. Almost. Adrian resigned from Heartland before the organization completed its internal restructuring. Her name appeared in local stories for a few weeks. Some called her a whistleblower. Some called her disloyal. A national animal welfare group offered her a public-facing director position. 2 donors suggested she start a rescue of her own. Another organization wanted to put her on a speaking tour. Adrian declined all of them. When she finally told Colby what she had accepted instead, they were standing beside his workbench while Levy slept beneath the pump testing table. "Compliance logistics," she said. Colby looked up from a pressure valve. "That sounds deliberately boring." "It is. Congratulations." She threw a shop rag at him. Adrian's new job would involve disaster relief organizations across several states. No fundraising videos, no interviews unless required. She would build systems for unique animal identities, independent intake verification, vendor conflict disclosures, offline record reconciliation, and audit trails that could survive lost networks, storms, and inconvenient questions. "Basically," Colby said, "you're making paperwork harder to lie with." Adrian considered it. "Yes, that might be the nicest thing I've ever said about paperwork. I'll have it framed." Her burnt orange notebook sat on the bench between them. It was nearly full now. The same notebook that had once contained deployment schedules held pages of questions that had eventually cost Adrian her old career. Colby looked at it. A promise is only real when keeping it costs you something. Adrian's expression changed. "My father." "Yes." She waited. Colby wiped his hands carefully and opened the lower drawer beneath the bench. This time he did not hesitate. He removed the old metal box. Inside were the photograph and a copy of the mission report he had found weeks earlier. He had reread the report since then, not looking for a secret, looking for permission to stop treating it like one. Colby handed both items to Adrian. She took the photograph first. Her father stood beside a much younger Colby, both men squinting into hard sunlight. Gordon Hart looked leaner than he did in the framed photographs Adrian remembered from childhood. Younger, too. Less like a commander, more like a man. Then she unfolded the report. Most of it was administrative language, times, locations, personnel movements. One line near the bottom recorded that Commander Hart had re-entered the affected compartment after Colby had reached the extraction route. Adrian read the sentence twice. "That's it?" Colby nodded. She looked at him. "No hidden account of what happened? No. No final message? No." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "Good." Colby had not expected that answer. Adrian touched one finger to the photograph. "People always want the dead to leave perfect last words." Colby said nothing. "My mother used to hate that. Every anniversary someone would ask if Dad had said anything meaningful before he deployed." She folded the report carefully. "He probably complained about coffee." "He definitely complained about coffee." That earned a real laugh. It faded naturally. Adrian looked at him again. "Why did you keep this all these years?" Colby stared at the metal box. He could have given her the old answer. Duty, respect, memory, all technically true, none sufficient. Maybe I thought keeping proof that he saved me was the same as paying him back. Adrian was quiet. Then she said, "It wasn't. No. You know that now?" Colby looked down at Levi. The dog slept on his side, one forepaw resting against the leg of the workbench. "Yes." Adrian held the photograph against the report. "My father didn't pull you out so you could spend 30 years apologizing for being alive." Colby's jaw moved once. "That sounds like something you've been waiting to say." "I have. You practiced?" "A little." He nodded. "It was good." Adrian smiled. They did not hug. Neither needed to turn the moment into something larger than it was. When she left Kentucky 2 days later, she took the photograph. Colby kept the empty metal box. For the first time, empty did not feel like loss. A week after Adrian left, Colby drove into town with 3 envelopes on the passenger seat. Levi rode beside him. At the county veterans office, Colby remained in the truck for almost 5 minutes. Then he picked up the envelopes. Harlan Vick was behind his desk, wearing a heather gray cardigan over a blue Oxford shirt. The old Navy accordion file beside his elbow looked capable of surviving several administrations. Harlan glanced at the envelopes, then at Colby. "You lost?" "Probably." "That's promising." Colby sat down. He placed the letters on the desk. 3 notices. 3 words he had remembered more clearly than everything around them. Closed, closed, closed. Harlan read the first, then the second, then the third. He did not begin by defending anyone. That helped. "This first one was decided," Harlan said. "Not ignored. You disagreed with the outcome, but you didn't pursue the next review option." Colby nodded once. Harlan opened the second letter. "This supplemental filing got caught after an evidence request wasn't completed within the required step. I sent the records. You sent records. We need to see whether they were attached to this filing." He tapped the third envelope. "And this one is different again. Looks like the review track had an administrative problem after documents were received." Colby leaned back. "So the system worked." Harlan looked at him. "I did not say that." "Good. I said 3 things happened. You turned them into one story." Colby's face hardened. Harlan did not retreat. "The story was that they looked at you 3 times and decided you weren't worth helping." Colby stared at the desk. "Didn't feel very different. I believe that." Harlan slid the letters into a row. "But feeling abandoned and understanding exactly where the process failed are 2 different jobs." Colby thought of Owen's folders, Dr. Kell's foster agreement, Adrian's notebook. One fact at a time. One person doing one part correctly. Harlan folded his hands. "Do you want me to help?" That was all. No guarantee. No promise of a favorable result. Just an offer. Colby remained silent long enough that Harlan began organizing the envelopes again. Then Colby said, "Yes." Harlan stopped. "Good." He pulled an authorization form from the accordion file. Colby read it, every line. Harlan waited. Colby signed. About a week later, a new notice arrived. Colby opened it at the kitchen table, while Levi rested beneath the window. The letter did not contain a check. It did not contain an apology. It did not reverse years of frustration. It confirmed that the review had been received on the correct track. A reviewer had been assigned. The outstanding documents were listed specifically. There was a reference number and a next procedural step. Colby read it twice, then placed it on the table. Levi came over and rested his muzzle against Colby's knee. "That's not a victory," Colby said. Levi looked unimpressed by administrative distinctions. Colby scratched beneath the pale half-moon patch under the dog's chin. But somebody knows where the file is. That was enough for today. Winter settled properly over Cumberland after that. Fresh snow covered the flood mud along the lower roads. Creeks returned to their banks. Damaged pumps were replaced one household at a time. Colby did not open an animal rescue. He did not start a foundation. Nobody convinced him to give speeches. Renshaw Pump and Well Repair remained exactly what it had been. One cabin, one workshop, one service truck, too many spare fittings, and a man who preferred problems with measurable pressure. There was one addition, a small sign beside the driveway. Emergency well and pump repair, no charge during flood or freeze. Below it was Colby's phone number. No logo, no sponsor, no inspirational phrase. LaVie's temporary placement eventually became permanent after the ownership issues were resolved through the proper process. Colby signed those papers too. This time he did not resent every page. One bright winter morning, Colby worked outside the shop replacing a mechanical seal on a pump assembly. Sunlight reflected off new snow until the hills seemed almost white-blue. LaVie lay near the open workshop door, golden legs stretched forward, black saddle warmed by the sun. From somewhere down in the valley, the county emergency siren began its scheduled test. LaVie lifted his head. Both ears angled toward the sound. Colby stopped turning the wrench. For a second, neither moved. The siren continued. LaVie did not flatten himself to the ground. He did not search for somewhere to hide. He listened, then looked at Colby. Colby looked back. No reassurance was required. LaVie lowered his head onto his paws. Colby returned to the pump. The wrench turned. The seal seated. Water pressure would either hold or it would not. People were more complicated. Institutions even more so. Colby still did not believe a name on a building deserved trust. He probably never would. But he no longer believed one broken promise proved that every promise waiting behind it would break too. Some people kept their word badly. Some failed. Some tried again. And some simply showed up the next morning and did the work they had said they would do. For Colby, trust no longer meant believing in the whole system. It meant giving one person, one promise, one next step the chance to prove itself. LaVie closed his eyes in the winter sun. Colby kept working. Sometimes healing does not begin when the whole system finally works. It begins when one person shows up, keeps one small promise, and gives us a reason to try again. Colby never learned to trust every institution, and LaVie never forgot everything that frightened him. What changed was simpler. Both learned that the next sound, the next hand, and the next promise did not have to end the way the last one did. Maybe that is worth remembering in our own lives. We do not have to trust blindly, but we also do not have to let yesterday decide every tomorrow. If this story stayed with you, tell us what trust means to you in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about courage, loyalty, and second chances, please like, share, and subscribe. May you find good people who keep their word, and may you have the courage to recognize them when they do.